Okay, I think we're ready to go. I've introduced myself first. My name is Tom Arnold. I'm a new member of the board, which I'm delighted and honoured to be a member of this board. And my reflection on today is what a wonderful occasion this is to learn from each other. I think we've had a really productive day, and now we've reached the final session, the final panel session, on the very interesting topic of global trends in food loss and waste prevention policy and food donation. And the panel will examine how food donation policy can help achieve government commitments on climate and the environment. And that almost brings us back to our opening session this morning when we had the presentation from CIMMIT. So we've 5 panelists. We've a relatively short time, but we're going to start with Jacques Vandenschrik from the European Food Banking Association. And Jacques, we've heard from you already, and you gave a very interesting indication about how policy in the EU vis-a-vis food banks has developed. And you've been really at the center of that conversation. So you said earlier you were going to talk more about what, moving on from this morning. Can you please tell us about the various EU level recommendations and guidelines relating to reducing food waste and increasing food donation? And you have a certain liberty in terms of expanding to answering that question.
Okay. In terms of the European Union regulations, since 2015 there has been a production of a legislative framework that is rather interesting. In 2015 was the first promulgation of a regulation that was called Closing the Loop, an EU Action Plan for the Circular Economy. So they were actually launching that. It was mentioning the importance to promote and foster food donation. In 2016, and this is unique in the EU history, in 2016, the EU platform on food loss and food waste was established, and in 2017, the guidelines were published. I think it's unheard of to achieve a result with all the stakeholders in Europe, so all the states, all the agencies, the civil society, getting together, discussing these issues, and putting together a document that is now public, that everybody can see, and that has actually the quality of giving clear directions and explanation on what is allowed in food donation, what is not. Then, after that, that was really an important point, and I must stress that our organization is a member of that platform. After that came a number of regulations that actually fine-tuned, and either the initial law that dates back to 2004, if I make no mistake, but the initial law on food was amended so that certain practices have been actually documented, and for example, the deep freezing of food on the day of expiry has been regulated and documented so that we actually benefit from this type of regulations. There is another one that is not yet introduced, but it is interesting. It should be introduced before the end of 2023, and that is a new regulation that will introduce binding food loss and food waste reduction targets by sector of the supply chain, production, transformation, distribution, and consumption. We don't know yet the exact figures, but more efforts will be asked from the distribution and consumption than from the transformation sector. And there is a logic to that. And in turn, the transformation sector will have to do more effort than the production sector. And there is also a logic to that. So the goals will be set at the national level by the EU and the member state, by the European Union. The member state will be free to choose any instrument they like, but they will have a goal, an objective that is obviously linked to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's very interesting how quickly progress was made at the beginning, and you've been building on that since then. Okay, let's move to a country that I'm not as familiar with, Ecuador. José Luis, could you tell us about Ecuador's recent food donation policy, the law to prevent and reduce food loss and waste, and reduce the hunger of people in vulnerable situations? You mentioned that it has not been enforced yet. So what do you expect will come next? And do you anticipate that this law will have an impact on the rates of food donation, given that the organic waste ban focuses on diverting surplus food to donation? A long question. I hope you can manage to address it. Thank you.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be sharing this room with so many people who think or share this spirit of cooperation that exists within food banks. In Ecuador, we had 3 bills presented. They were unified, and in May of 2022, the law to prevent food waste and loss and mitigation of poverty in people who are in vulnerable situations, that law was enacted. Now, we don't see yet an increase, an impact on the number of donations, on the amount of donations since the law was enacted, because it's a pretty general law. So we're still waiting for the regulations under the law, regulations that contemplate specific aspects of it. So we have not seen an increase in donations so far. However, for us, it is important that this step was taken in this conversation, because the issue of loss and waste was really not discussed in the country. Now, we have taken this first step, and there are many things within the law that we believe could be improved, and there's many things that we expect from the private sector and also to be promoted by the food banks, so that this law has more of an impact. However, it is a first step, and we expect that this conversation comes to the public arena and that it is promoted so we can reach more people in a more organized way.
The main thing is that you've got law passed now, and that's the foundation for future development. So thank you very much for that. Now we're coming closer to home and to our gracious host for this conference, Chair, I believe you're known as. And there is a voluntary agreement. How is a voluntary agreement related with food donation policy advocacy? And I'm sure advocacy is core to the work you do as an organization.
Bienvenidos a México.
Okay,
todos.
thank you. Welcome everybody to Mexico. It's a pleasure to have you and to share with you. Thank you for the question, because the voluntary agreement is a methodology that we have been implementing since 2021, since our partners from grabbing the United Kingdom. We decided to study what's working in other countries on the work that's done on the issue of food waste and loss, so that we can work with the most effective model of food rescue, which we know is ours here. So we ended up getting to know the methodology that RAP has implemented already in the UK, which has allowed it to reduce by 27% as a country, their food waste and loss. So you can imagine how much they have progressed towards this goal, the Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Now, the methodology that they created of voluntary agreements allows us to join the commitment of the different signatory companies and other actors who are not necessarily companies in the food sector in order to implement additional measures to measure waste, to identify the sources, and to create action on specific goals. So in Mexico, we already launched the first voluntary agreement to reduce food waste and loss. At the Latin American level, it's called Pacto por la Comida, or Pact for Food. Part of the methodology is creating work groups that allow us to work and develop a measurement of food waste and loss so we can work on donations. Part of what we want to achieve with these voluntary agreements is that by finding the origin of this food waste and loss inside companies, that leads to action. And one of the first actions that's taken is donation, just to elevate the level of donations. We believe that with this work, with Pacto por la Comida, with this voluntary agreement, we will be establishing the foundation with the different actors that are getting involved, not just the food sector, but also academia, companies in the logistics sector, and of course food banks, to establish a foundation so that we can develop public policies that incentivize food donation. So we're coming from a different approach. It's a longer road. It always is with public policy, but in this case, through a methodology that allows us to gather information on how it works with a different approach to food waste and loss. And I think we will be establishing the foundation to then be able to influence political or public policy in the short and medium term.
Very encouraging. I mean, you've made considerable progress already, and we'll come back maybe in the second round to looking forward as to where it might go from there. Gabrielle, you're the board member of Feeding Hong Kong, and I think there'll be a great deal of interest in the room about the situation in Hong Kong, given the overall political climate there. But you played an important role in moving a food waste ban forward in Hong Kong. Can you speak a bit on that process, the challenges, and where that policy is now? Thank you.
Well, thank you. And first of all, just to say I'm delighted to be here. It was a very last-minute addition, so thank you for welcoming me to the panel. I should start by saying I can't take any personal credit at all, and neither can Feeding Hong Kong for what's happening. But we're very excited and encouraged by the new law that's coming through. Two words that are not being associated with Hong Kong very much at the moment. So I think it's really important to talk about what's happening. I just want to start by giving a little bit of context. So Hong Kong is a city of 7.5 million people squashed into a tiny, tiny space. And we are wasting more and recycling less than ever before. And the thing that we are wasting the most is food. It's about a third of all waste that's sent to landfill. And we're facing a situation at the moment where we have 3 landfills and they are reaching capacity. So in the next few years, we will have no landfill space. So to say we are facing a waste crisis, I mean, is really, just skimming the surface of the reality there. And it's against this background that the government has recently announced a waste blueprint for Hong Kong. And there's a lot of different objectives under this, but kind of the headline one is zero waste to landfill by 2035. And then as a part of this, one of the key steps that they've announced is a municipal waste bill. And it's all about charging for waste disposal, which up until now, just you pay nothing for your waste. That's individuals as well as consumers. So this is a massive step forward. And just to pick up on some of the conversations earlier about how long these things take, this bill was first proposed in 2005. It was passed in 2018. It hasn't yet come into effect, but we're hoping that 2023 will be the year that it happens. Now, what does this mean for food donation? We're excited about it because we think it's really going to move the dial, particularly with food companies, who right now, there is just no financial disincentive in terms of them handling their waste. There's also no financial incentives. We've got no Good Samaritan legislation. So this really is the very first step. But what it means if they choose to donate rather than dump their waste, there is going to be a financial saving. So that's really where we're coming into the conversation. And I'm really encouraged by the way that companies are responding to this. But as I say, very early days. It's been passed, but it hasn't yet come into effect.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And finally, last but certainly not least, we'll go to Chile and Quene. Could you tell us about Chile's tax penalty for destroying or discarding food still suitable for human consumption? And we understand that in Chile, you cannot write off wasted food as a business loss for tax deduction, which is a significant disincentive to waste food. And how does this type of policy increase food donation? Thank you.
Hola. Primero, gracias
Hello,
por
first of
invitarme a
all,
este panel.
thanks for inviting me to this panel. Really, in Chile, there is a difference. We do not have food donations, but what's regulated fiscally is the use of excess of waste. So there's this. It's the same cost if you destroy than if you send to organizations that work with vulnerable populations with products that are not commercial. So that was established in 2010, and then Chile was able to start rescuing products, because before that, the companies were not allowed to deliver the product, and they had to show that they destroyed it so they could deduct it. What happened in 2020 with the tax reform was that legislated voluntary destruction. So that causes the rejection of the expense as a deduction if the company destroys goods that are good for human consumption. The problem is, like in other places, that we have the law, but we still don't have the regulations, and it's still a little bit of dead print. The tax authority recently issued some guidelines, but it only contemplates shops that work with the public, so that leaves all the other companies outside, and it does not really define what voluntary destruction is compared to involuntary destruction. So it's still something that's very difficult to put into practice. However, in Chile, we have continued to grow. We have continued rescuing product and growing significantly year after year. Now, the breaking news is that last year, towards the end of last year, very more general regulations on donations were promulgated, but they cover all sort of donation, donations in kind, donations in cash. It's a very wide regulation that we're implementing. It's pretty easy to implement. There's certificates for donation, and so we can now receive donated product. So we're going along another path. We have looked for different paths in order to simplify the rescue of food. So this new donation law allows us to rescue any type of products. As I said, it could be material goods or non-material goods.
Thank you very much. I mean, the sense I get from all of these contributions is that things are, generally speaking, moving in the right direction. Laws are being put in place. Politically, this is an issue which should receive large. It shouldn't be threatening people. So it opens up political possibilities. I'd like maybe in the second round of contributions to look towards the future and look in your own view where real progress might be made over the next, say, 5 years, because I think that's the sort of time frame we need to be looking at. And I know with you, Jacques, there are some promising examples of member states implementing the policies that have been agreed at EU level, such as Spain, Italy, France, and the Czech Republic's food waste deterrent policies and donation requirements. So, in your best vision of where you would like to go over the next number of years, could you maybe and everybody else. Could we talk about that now?
So perhaps for the benefit of the audience, I would like to quickly summarize what is special about the countries that you have just mentioned. And but basically, when you look at the member state, because this is no longer EU policy, at the member state, what their initiatives have been, they have adopted basically two approaches. A voluntary and incentivizing approach, and a more coercive approach. So the good example of a voluntary and incentivizing approach is the so-called Gada law in Italy. So that law provides for 100% of the market value of donated food is tax deductible. Tax deductible. This facility has now been extended to other products than food, and the law clearly lays out the liability of each actor of the supply chain. And since that law, food donations from retailers have more than tripled. So it worked. If I look at another one, in Portugal, donors can deduct 140% of the value of the donated food if it will be used for social purposes. So the freedom to choose whether to donate or not allows the retailers to use donations as part of an advertising campaign. More coercive is France. Retailers are obliged to sign an agreement with a charity to donate surplus food. This has led to an increase in donation from retailers by about 33% since the inception of that regulation in 2015. The Czech Republic, in my opinion, is the star. It is mandatory for retailers to donate their unsold products to food banks. They have to do it. They don't have the choice. In this latter case, the government has also provided substantial funds to allow food banks to increase their operational capacity, warehouses, employee salaries, trucks, etc. In the Czech Republic, this approach has been spectacularly successful by increasing the number of final beneficiaries from 66,000 before in 2016 to 313,000 in 2022. So this actually is remarkable, that if you give the means and the resources to the food banks, they could actually improve dramatically food loss and waste reduction and help more people. Unfortunately, in some member states, there is almost no legal incentive to donate, and more can be done in order to strengthen the regulatory framework to support food donation and reduce food waste. In terms of a future outlook, as you asked, I would like to say that the trend will probably be, as the regulations are becoming more and more familiar in the member states, to actually see the member states implementing a regulatory framework that could be either, depending on the political side of things, but it could be either incentivizing or more coercive. I think it is, there are a few things that need to be addressed if we want to be successful. I think the first one is raising the awareness and to build that awareness on expertise and competence. The topic of food waste prevention is high on the political agenda, both at the EU and international levels. However, there is still a lot to do in terms of raising awareness with public authorities and food business operators. Sharing successful evidence-based practice. Leveraging successful evidence-based practice in food donation can further contribute to food waste prevention. Tools such as the EU Food Loss and Waste Prevention Hub, that's another initiative, could help to communicate and disseminate, but also to scale up and replicate actions. The last one I think that is important is to support those who are already doing food redistribution. We need to have national legislation boosting food donation in line with the European policies. We need to have financial support from the European and national authorities if we want to be as good as the Czech Republic is. And we need to improve the fiscal incentives for a better valorization of surplus food by tax benefits for food donors. This is, I think, where the main trends will lead us in the coming years.
I mean, the fact that you're able to identify success stories, I mean, they need to be documented and put out there in the public arena, so that it's become clear this is a good idea. Food policy, successful policy on food loss and waste. José Luis, in your opening contribution, you talked about the fact that you have the legislation on the books now, and you still have a distance to go to implement it. But who are the key players that you need to get support from to achieve that? No, José Luis.
Sí, principalmente pues para nosotros,
mainly for us,
para poder impulsar.
to be able to promote this for the future, the main actors, in our case, in our country, we want to incentivize this through the creation of networks, because we believe that, united we become stronger. And for the future, if we want to improve, these laws, it is very important for us to have this fiscal policy in place. And we believe this fiscal policy can only be done directly with the support of all the different sectors. So all forces need to join together, all the provinces in Ecuador in this case. So I think that is the fundamental thing that we need to do in the future. And the main actors should be food banks in this proposal. And we need to promote this, on our behalf to the public and private sector.
You can get that level of support from these key collaborators.
Sí, de hecho nosotros.
In fact, we try to promote this in Ecuador, and the food bank networks have not been established per se, but we are promoting this unity between the two food banks that we have right now, certified food banks in Ecuador, by promoting, the collaboration of all the different provinces in our country with this purpose.
Very good, thank you. We had the great pleasure yesterday morning of seeing some of the work your organization does, CARE. So how do you see things going over the next number of years here in Mexico in particular?
Bueno, consideramos que tenemos que seguir actuando. Is it working? ¿Sí funciona? ¿No funciona? Gracias. Consideramos que tenemos que...
We consider that we need to keep acting on both levels. Federal level, from the National Association standpoint, and work with the states. And that is the formula. That's what we've been doing for the last few years. We have a few initiatives that we have started at the federal level that have stopped for different reasons. The other thing is you have to read the environment. You need to know when is the right time to push for things. We know when we have the political will to keep pushing. And if we don't do things at the federal level, we need to push at the state level, which is what we're doing right now, where the food banks are the head of different initiatives. And I think if we do that, if we work hand in hand with the different legislators, historically, they have been the only active actors formulating bills that have to do with food and the promotion of avoiding food waste and loss. But the proposals that are being generated, many of them lack the basis, the fact that the problem is not recognized as a whole, and you should do that before you can have realistic solutions, and that they should consider then models already in existence, such as ours. So we know that we have a very complex political system, but we keep working. We know that to have an effect on political policies is important. This is something that we need to do medium term, long term. We're going to continue with our strategy. We're going to go work with the legislators, help them be aware. We invite them to come to the food banks. The idea is never go with one political party, go to everybody, make them all part, so that they can visit the community and they learn about the model so that we can move forward. It has not been easy at all. Some laws have passed. There was one in 2020 that is in the freezer in the Senate right now, is there for approval. We know it's not going to be done, not in the coming years anyway. That hasn't stopped food banks in Mexico from looking for other solutions and trying to generate models state by state and generate initiatives that can promote food rescue. And Nuevo León is one of the places where this is happening. They have a law they passed that puts food in the center, and now we do have the budget that pays for it, and the idea is to rescue more food and to deliver it to the vulnerable population. So we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep walking the same roads. For
Mexico relates to everywhere. I mean, food waste should be an area of political consensus, so that when governments change, policy doesn't change. And I think that's a crucially important point to make. Gabrielle, you're, of course, in a slightly different position in terms of your political situation. But, I mean, from your perspective, what opportunities do you see over the next few years to build on the progress that you've made already in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall we're optimistic. I think we could start by saying when we were starting out back in 2009, there was no food donation at all. There was no food redistribution in the city. And so when I look at how far we've come just from 2009 to today, where we now have hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that are engaging with the collection and the redistribution of food, I think that's already a massive step forward. And why I think it's so important that now the government is joining the conversation is it's making food donation part of a wider conversation. The interesting thing, although this has very much come from the environmental point of view, driven by the waste issue, when they were passing the municipal waste law, actually in the debate and the discussion in LegCo, the topic of food donation came up as a way that players could reduce waste to landfill. So actually including the food donation was a massive, massive step forward. And the next thing that's followed from this is that we now have ownership of food donation by a government department, which again is a big thing, because for years we've been passed back and forth between different departments. So I remember very, very early on having conversations with the Environmental Protection Department and inviting them to come and visit us at the food bank. And they came and they were, loved what they saw and said how great this was, but would always end every visit by going, but this is a social welfare issue. So then we'd invite the social welfare department along and they'd come and they'd tell us they loved what we were doing, but it was an environmental department decision. And so we were batted back and forth, and ultimately we just took a step back and just got on with what we were doing, and we've been able to get as far as we have without government support. But now, because of this law that's come through, the Environmental Protection Department has stepped up and taken ownership of this issue, and that is now just flowing through to funding the food banks as well, for food redistribution. So they're looking at setting up funds now to cover logistics costs of organisations such as ours to collect and deliver rescued food. So this is why I'm hopeful that I feel this is a step, and there's obviously lots of complicated things that we can say about politics and the government in Hong Kong, but this is a bright spot, and I think one that we should say that yeah, we're encouraged by, and we want to celebrate and see how far we can go. But I think in 5 years we will see another major step forward.
Good, very encouraging. Last but not least, what's your perspective? I mean, Chile, my understanding is that Chile has been a leader in other aspects of food policy, for example, and labeling and etc. So where do you see, in your world of food banks, where do you see the potential for progress in the next 5 years?
Mira,
Well, in order to answer that, I mean, I'm still hearing what Giri said this morning. I think that the laws in Chile have taken a long time. We started 13 years, but we've been trying to change policies for 20 years. So we went in through the tax side. We have tried to approach it through the environmental side. In 2017, there was a law passed on the environment in 2017, but there's still no regulations so to prevent waste. But with this most recent law, the General Law of Donations, I think that that's the path to maybe provide some incentive to companies. But thinking about how to move forward, I would say that a substantial change in Chile, besides what we've done already, could be more related to labeling and have a preferred buy date. Because in Chile, like in many countries, we have just one date up to which it can be consumed, it can be sold. So I think that could be an open door, but it's pretty difficult. We have had discussions with the Ministry of Health in Chile. They have been pretty reluctant to they're convinced that that product right after the day of expiration date is not going to be up for consumption. So we need to continue working with the rules of the game that we have. We've done that for the last few years, and we've come out all right.
Thank you to all the panel. I think it's been a very interesting exchange. I just draw maybe two conclusions. This morning, our friend from CIMIT said that we have reached the point now where food banks are part of a wider discussion on food policy. And they have a legitimate role, an important role to play as part of that wider policy. And I think that same idea seems also needs to be increasingly brought into the conversation about climate change. And coming up at the end of this year, you have COP28, where I believe, for the first time, the important role of the important link between food and climate is going to be highlighted. And that's again a context, and I think an opportunity for the food bank movement to make its voice heard, to say that, look, we are part of a bigger, wider picture, and we have an important contribution to play. So there are my two concluding remarks. Am I handing over to anyone, to Doug, or to Doug to rescue me? Thank you very much indeed.